Namaste. My name is Preity Upala, and I am a global thought leader and a multimedia personality. Welcome to my podcast, The Preity Experience. Join me as I explore some of the most fascinating and crucial issues that affect our world today. I take a unique global perspective on these issues, and the very foundation of my insights is humanity and spirituality. I'm Preity Upala, and welcome to the Preity Experience.
For the second time in 3 weeks, terror struck France, and this time with the gruesome beheading of a history teacher in a street in a Paris suburb. The suspected attacker was shot and killed by the police later on. French President Emmanuel Macron announced and denounced what he called an Islamist terror attack and urged the nation to stand united against extremism. The teacher had discussed caricatures of Islam's Prophet Muhammad with his class, authorities said. The French anti-terrorism prosecutor opened an investigation for murder with a suspected terrorist motive. 4 people, one a minor, were also detained a few hours later. Macron visited the school where the teacher worked in the town of Conflans-en-Orne and met with the staff after the incident. He said that the attack shouldn't divide France because that's what the extremists want. He said, and I quote, "We must stand all together as citizens." He said that the allegations are similar to charges brought last month against a 25-year-old Pakistani man who wounded 2 people with a meat cleaver attack to avenge the publication of caricatures of the Prophet Muhammad by a satirical weekly, Charlie Hebdo. That attack came 3 weeks into an ongoing trial of suspected accomplices of the authors of the January 2015 attacks on Charlie Hebdo and a Jewish supermarket, which also saw a policewoman gunned down on the street. We'll talk about this. France has been grappling with terrorism and extremism in a hot and cold fashion. We've seen that the country has been divided on a number of issues, especially some of the liberal publications and their depiction of the Prophet has led to a number of attacks in the country, and this one being the latest. So what does this imply? There was perhaps a lull in the last few years because of COVID-19 and other reasons that gave away perhaps this notion that extremism is only prevalent in perhaps a Syria or a Pakistan. That is not to be. It is an emotion that pervades culture. It's an emotion that pervades any continental boundaries. We'll discuss this with our guest. Joining me on the panel is Ambassador Dr. Deepak Vohra, former Secretary, Ministry of External Affairs. Preity Upala, editor of The Observer. She joins us from California. Ambassador Vohra joins us from the East Coast. He's in New York right now. So a global audience and a panel on today. And last but not the least, Sumit Peer is also here with us to talk more about this. Ambassador Vohra, you are in New York, a city perhaps which shaped or defined or symbolizes how terrorism has affected this world. But the good part is that in the United States, it's not happened after 2001. The authorities have really cracked down upon anybody who gives away or reeks of extremism. What is France not doing? Because they continue to have this as a menace.
Thank you, Mr. Malhotra, for this opportunity to learn from you and from the other colleagues on the panel. It has particularly affected me, sir. In the mid-70s, I was studying at the University of the Sorbonne. And at that time, I had in my class students from Iran, from Iraq, from the Middle East, from you name it, they were there. Nobody ever thought about terrorism attacking individuals. Terrorism had a political flavor then in the Middle East with aircraft hijack and so on. Now it's become extremely personal, if I may say so, societal. The first thing that we are seeing now, sir, in France as a result of these renewed attacks is a hardening of attitudes towards terrorism and the willingness to call out jihadi terrorism. France, as you know, is one of the, possibly arguably one of the most open societies in the world. The Muslims make up 10% of France's population. the 1789 French Revolution changed our world forever. People stood up for their rights. Today, again, we are seeing this profound transformation. Sir, you referred to the November and 2015 attacks. I was there, sir, for a reunion of my class of the Sorbonne. I was right there on the 13th of November. And the French president, then French president, was watching a football match in a soccer stadium when this happened. But the important thing was that in the aftermath of those attacks, signs cropped up across Paris with the centuries-old Latin motto of Paris, Fluctuat nec mergitur, which means she is tempest-tossed but does not sink. I believe what you're seeing in France today is a movement to recognize and name the source of this terrorism. They're talking openly about jihad and calling for a strengthening of their laws to make sure that those who choose to make France their home abide by the ideas. Remember, sir, the original, la liberté, égalité, fraternité, freedom, equality, and brotherhood. Those are the values that have to be accepted, but France is suffering because of its open policies and its willingness to absorb everybody into its bosom, much like India, sir. That's why many French people say that we are so similar to the Indian system, where you are tolerant, where you adopt, where you adapt, where you embrace diversity rather than suppressing it. This is very, very sad what has happened, sir.
Sumit, Ambassador Vora brings out a very crucial point that whatever is happening in the country today, the jihadi elements, which in fact don't even need to hide anymore, they're out in the open. They are curtailing the freedom of expression that the President of France also spoke about. But how can they get out of this? They've already allowed these people to flourish and prosper.
I think, Vineet, first of all, thanks for having me on your show. I want to wish you the happy Navratri to all the millions of viewers who are actually watching this, as is the first day of Navratris, and all the best to all. Coming back to the discussion, Vineet, the most important thing is that if you are from one of the Abrahamic faiths, I mean, for example, if you're a Muslim, now if you go to a country which is French, which 90% is still the French, you cannot have best of both the worlds. Either you choose to live in an Islamic country like Iran or a Syria, wherein you can have the Sharia law or whatever. Either you go to a much opener society, which is France, US, and many other countries. So when you choose a country, you have to be open, you have to be civilized, because in today's world, there is no option a person can have to decide upon the life or death of any other person. You're not God. Who are you to choose if anybody will live or die? What is this beheading about? These are all medieval traits. This is medieval extremism. And I appreciate the President of France who very categorically says it's Islamic extremism. So we can't tell them even terrorists, they're Islamic terrorists. And Islamic terrorism needs to be dealt the way it was dealt in Syria and Sudan and other countries. Because if you let them grow, we cannot let these people represent the Muslim faith. We cannot let these people become heroes within the community. We cannot let these people, again, to scare those free living societies like the West, or even for that matter, India. Because these people have to be dealt very, very hard and very, very stringent. You have to change laws, you have to enforce your military, police, whatever it needs. Because today they are a microscopic minority. Because if you let them flourish, tomorrow if they become 1-2% of the population, it will be very, very difficult to control. Because if you look at the population of France and look and see the number, how much 1 or 2% can be, it will be very, very difficult to control. Remember, 19 people brought down the World Trade Center. It's as dangerous as that. So these radicals need to be dealt with the iron hand, and the leaders in the world have to stop to be politically correct. They cannot hide behind the fact that terrorism has no religion, it has no color, this should be seen as a one-off incident. You call spade a spade and handle it. I'm not saying that, you see the community like that. They're only a microscopic 0.01% of the people who have these extremist wills and fancies and these ideas, and they need to be eliminated as soon as possible. So it's the question of political desire and stopping to be politically correct. Have the political desire, stop to be politically correct, protect your country, protect your values, protect your people, and protect the identity of France, which is thousands of years old. Else, if this keeps on happening, there will be anarchy and mayhem on the French roads, and it will spread the whole of Europe and possibly to the whole of the world. So this is the time it has reached a tipping point, because freedom of expression and the right and liberty to live cannot be determined by me for you or you for me. It doesn't happen in civilized societies. It's the time to change we need. Else we are going for doom.
Absolutely. And Preity, France calls itself a very liberal, a very democratic way of life. Perhaps, it is as liberal and democratic as the scenario or the setup in the United States, or for that matter, any other country in Europe, including the United Kingdom. but they have been able to avoid and relegate some of these attacks. What has France not been doing? Is it the message that they've been sending out, to these extremists that perhaps is not potent enough? Because, if United States can curtail it, which is a much larger country in size than France, and with a larger population, of Muslim population, I should say, then what is the predicament that France is in?
Well, namaste, Mr. Malhotra. Lovely to be on your show, and happy Navaratri to all of your audience. On September 11, 2001, the US realized what Islamic terrorism was. India had known it for 1,000 years. This is like such a famous saying, but it's true. I think before 9/11, even America was very much walking half asleep as far as this issue was concerned. But as soon as it happened, it took very drastic steps. I must say the fight against terrorism is nowhere near curbed either in the US or outside. And of course, their war in Afghanistan is futile at this point. But I think the big difference that I see in America and a country like France, by the way, which gave the world the concept of secularism. So I think it's ironic, it's a sad joke that France finds itself having a multitude of these attacks. This is not the first one. It's been happening for a while. But the difference between the US and the France is, I think the US has always been America first. They are an extremely nationalistic country, and I just think that their mindset, how they're built, how they view the world is they're very insular, and they look at themselves as this mighty country. And I think it's also a very Christian nation. I think that's a big difference. America is a Christian nation, a very religious country, with lots of puritanicals. So they take their faith very seriously. And even though their US Constitution is technically, there is a separation of church and state, it's still very Christian. And we can see with the Supreme Court justice hearings, religion is playing such a big part, even in the nominations and the appointments of the judge. So with France, when they made that decision to be secular, they were secular completely to the letter. And France is not a religious country at all. Most of the people there are probably atheists. And so this concept of religion wasn't such a big issue. And they look at all religions as the same. They think that they're all the same. And they never did enough research and background history, or even studying up on civilizational history to understand the different people that they took in, because the Northern African population is a big part of France today. In fact, there are several parts of suburbs that are almost 99% from Morocco, Algeria, or Tunisia, and there's so many suburbs like that. So I think there's been a real problem in treating all religions as benign and thinking that you're all going to be French, and not being taking enough care of the differences between cultures and civilizations. Now it may even be a little too late, considering it's such a huge number.
Right, absolutely. Sanjay Kapoor, editor of Hard News, also joins us on the platform. Sanjay, your reaction to what has happened in France? Obviously, the country has been extremely accommodative. Not only France, when people migrated out of Syria and other Middle Eastern countries as well, it were these European countries which were quite accommodative and embraceful of these refugees coming into their own country, despite the number of threats, number of problems, and number of taboos, if I can use the word, this entire migration had coming with it.
We need France is not. It's not nothing new for France to face Islamic, you can say, violence or threat, because we must go back to the time when they used to occupy Algeria. It was the most brutal war that France fought with the Algerians. And many people believe that the Al-Qaeda was actually a spillover of the violence and the entire uprising which took place in Algeria. It was something that had to be put down with a very heavy hand. So I think France, amongst all the countries, is far better prepared to take on Islamic terrorism than any other country. And for a long time, if you see before Charlie Hebdo and maybe one or two more cases, France was very quiet, very peaceful. I mean, they were not really impacted by terrorist violence for long, and there used to be reports and even some kind of case studies on what keeps France away from Islamic terror when US was blowing up and other England was happening. So the belief was that the French intel is very, very good, and they keep track of whoever is their suspect. They use technology, and at some stage it just gave way. I mean, whatever may have been the reason. And even their involvement in Mali, for that matter, which was supposed to take on the Al-Qaeda, that was also a bit counterproductive. So it's not that the French have been very large-hearted and they've been doing. In fact, they practice a kind of licetism, secularism, where they insist that, women should not cover their head, and, the extreme form which was brought in by Sarkozy at that time. Macron has in a way lessened it quite a bit, but that was even reluctance to allow space to the mosque. And they thought that there's a French way of life people should lead. So having said that, but what really happened is really, really tragic. It is something which we had thought we had put our backs to it. We thought that kind of violence was over after the decimation of Islamic State. But surely there are many sleeper cells which are going around with their knives and targeting people, innocent people. And this is something which is very disturbing, because what happens when you have an incident like this, the kind of publicity that follows a terror attack, there are more copycat attacks. So it's happened in France, it could happen elsewhere.
Okay.
So we have to be very, very careful about that.
All right. So, Ambassador Vora, France did ban the hijab. It said that, it is something which perhaps is not in tune with the values that they have been so accustomed to. And when you let people into your house, you insist that they play by their rules. And that's exactly what France expected would happen. But, obviously the apple has fallen very far from the tree.
You have said it very accurately that when France opened its doors to people from the previously quote-unquote oppressed regions of North Africa and West Africa, where it was the colonial power, they expected that these people had come in because they recognized the superior French system. They wanted to be part of the French dream. What is France all about, sir? Forget about the revolutionary ethics that Mr. Kapoor has put across so brilliantly. France is a mixture of cultures, its cafes, its hedonism, its good life, and the French always believed the rest of the world wanted to emulate them. Terrorism is not a new phenomenon, as my colleague just said, in France. Jihadist terrorism, however, has taken on a new dimension after 9/11, and more recently with the Syrian civil war and its call to arms. Tens of thousands of foreign volunteers have traveled to the Middle East to fight to defend, quote-unquote, oppressed Islam from alleged persecution, a plot hatched by the Jews, the Western countries, the heretic ones like India, to defend it and to expand the true Islamic State. In France supplied a very large proportion of these foreign fighters. So it has become a prime target of the jihad, which has now acquired a global dimension, sir. And I absolutely agree, and I've seen this because I was posted there, that their intelligence system is very strong. They know what is happening, but there is at times a conflict in their hearts between their desire to be the most open, the most egalitarian, the most fraternal society in the world, and the realization that this is not possible in the 21st century, sir.
Okay.
There have to be restrictions, and the French don't like this at all.
All right. How prudent is being egalitarian when the atmosphere is a bit of totalitarian? But Sumit, there were also talks about certain quarters in the country of United Kingdom as well, which has a huge Muslim population, of imposing the Sharia law in some parts of the country. Now, obviously, there has to be some demarcation when it comes to a civil code, whether it's religion, whether it's how you dress up, how you in fact worship gods, and how others perceive your gods and tenets.
I think, Vineet, you're absolutely right. That's why I made earlier the point is that in a civilized society, you cannot choose about anybody's life and death. That has to get out of your head very straight. If you have problems with that society, you can leave and go and choose another society and choose another country to live in. So if for these things start propelling a person to the level that he will go and behead somebody, there is a big risk the whole society as country is facing. Because if such 1,000 people come out on your streets, you are expecting anarchy and mayhem everywhere. So French have to take this thing very, very seriously, because this is an attack on the French liberty, French civilization, and the French way of life. How can you just say this is one-off terrorist attack? This is not a one-off terrorist attack. And if you look at all last three attacks made, all these three characters have been directly linked to Pakistan. I don't know what this person, maybe even he has a Pakistani root. So you might even see a Pakistani hand here. And you see there has been a constant denial before Macron. You see, Jacques Chirac never mentioned Islamic terror, and then after Sarkozy was here and there, but Mr. Macron is at least the president who's coming and talking about it openly. Now, I have traveled a lot to southern France. I used to do a lot of work in Toulouse. And if you look at that region, southern France, going down to Spain, there's a quite sizable amount of Muslim population there, which is from Morocco, Mauritania, Algeria, and some even are from Syria. So when this mixes up, now the ghettos are there, ghettos are there, then you have ISI, then you have these Wahhabi forces, then you have the Wahhabi funding coming, and you have these mosques coming up. And the best thing they do is they radicalize the youth, telling them, look, France is not for you, but you are French, you need to have your own small France within the France. That thought is killing, and when the leaders turn a blind eye to it, you let these Islamists, these fundamentalists ruin your country and all what you earned for thousands of years. The problem is politicians fear to call spade a spade. Like US President Donald Trump, is very explicit in what he thinks. But has Nicolas Sarkozy and Jacques Chirac said that he is not? Now I appreciate what the current president is doing. So if you admit a problem, then only you can have solutions. If you want to have an ostrich-like of attitude, ki bhai kuch nahi hai, then obviously there is nothing. But trust me, Vineet, if the numbers increase, this will be much dangerous than a lung cancer which spreads at the most alarming rate for the France to control. They have to act now. Don't see it as a one-off incident.
Okay, Preity, Upala, how has America managed to keep terrorism at bay in the last couple of decades? Is it the fact, or is it the fear that even if you think in that direction, perhaps the next morning you're going to wake up in Guantanamo Bay, and perhaps France too needs its own Guantanamo Bay today?
Well, the President Emmanuel Macron rightfully said that this is an attack on the Republic, on our Republic, and also this is an existential crisis for the country. This is an existential war that they're fighting. Racial, religious tensions in France have existed for several decades now, ever since we had loads of lots of people coming in from these northern African countries first, and then there were also other African countries. It sort of managed it, but now when you come to, there's always a tipping point with these things. This is like a demographic time bomb waiting to happen, and then I think it's 15% or something like that, and then it becomes unmanageable. Then you get your ghettos, you get your no-go zones, you get areas where you will comply with your laws and nobody can do about it. The problem is that the politicians have their hands tied behind their back. They are usually only interested in their next term. And to be able to get votes, they have to obviously do appeasement, which includes a sizable population. This same problem is happening in India. This is also happening in the US. You made a comment about how is the US, sort of curbing it. It hasn't curbed it entirely. I think the problem in the US is much more subversive. In Europe and in the UK, it's in your face, it's overt. In America, it's happening kind of in a very subversive way, and it's happening now through democracy. It's happening in politics. It's happening in situations where you're getting, leaders with a certain viewpoint being elected in all facets of the political arena, and then they're able to implement certain laws. We've seen this in Canada as well. Recently, there have been several very questionable laws that were passed. And this is very, very dangerous. And the America does have excellent intelligence. I think they're getting better, because even despite that intelligence, they've still had homegrown attacks. I mean, when I say homegrown, I don't mean Americana homegrown. They're still, American-born, let's say, foreign, ethnic people. I think the willingness to call out the kind of terror and be very unapologetic and in no uncertain terms. That's so important. I think it's nice to see France doing it. It's kind of a little too late, but look, it's better late than never. I think America, I know that President Trump says things, I think I'd like to see more implementation here, because we are not that far away from the next 9/11. And trust me, when that happens, I think it's going to shake the country again. And I don't think
all right, Preity, we've completely...
It'll be a different approach this time.
All right, Preity, valid point made over there that perhaps in the United States it's a lot more subversive. Ambassador Vora, you want to make a point? I can only give you 10 seconds and then 10 seconds for Sumit, and then we get the faders down.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to say that the Indonesian Islamic leader Yahya Khalid Stakuf, in an interview 4 or 5 years ago, he had said that you have to understand that the relationship between Muslims and non-Muslims is assumed to be one of segregation and enmity. And he made a very telling comment. Western politicians, wake up, stop pretending that extremism is not linked to Islam. It is. We are extremists, we are terrorists, accept that and live with it.
Valid point.
This is from an Islamic scholar. You decide what you want.
Sumit, 10 seconds and then we wrap up.
I think
you won't talk to me.
The country of great Napoleon, the Great, and the French civilization cannot be enslaved to a few 10% votes of the Muslim community and 0.1% extremists. That is the call the French people have to take and the French politicians have to take.
Okay.
Else the French civilization is under threat.
All right, Sanjay, 10 seconds for you as well, and then we go.
Yeah, I think this is the time to wake up, because, you know, we should also look at the context as to why it is happening. You can't say that France is innocent and whatever. You have to go to Libya, what they have done to Libya. They destroyed a country which was, you may disagree with Muammar Gaddafi, but they turned it into a country where slave trade has started all over again. You have warlords controlling that nation. So similarly, I think all these white countries should actually reflect how they have contributed in destroying much of the so-called Arab states and others due to their own way of looking at things. And there is a need to reflect how they can stop it, and it has to be a far more meaningful discussion which should take place than just looking at one snapshot and commenting on that. Thank you.
All right, I'm not sure the Western countries will understand the word reflect. Perhaps they'll misaccount it for deflect.